Hello. It is currently a little after 2 a.m. for me. Wasn't entirely sure if I would be doing this video after my placing tonight at GRG, Gilded Raven Games, but I decided to move forward with it in part to cover East Coast gamers and in part touch on Set 1 season as a whole, and in part because I think it will be good to review a loss. It always can't be wins, and players shouldn't always expect it to be wins. And reviewing a loss, I think, actually could give more insight than just recapping another first or top two or whatever it might be. So, I played in a total of 6 large events for Set 1. I'm not going to talk about the 1Ks, I just have them on there for completion's sake. Early in the season, not really much go into. Got to top 2, I think undefeated, and top 4 undefeated, and ended up splitting them. Showdowns, I covered looking for games in Red Seal Gaming in my last video. I'm going to cover East Coast Gamers and Gilded Raven Games in this video. I did run a very similar deck. This is only one card different from my last list, so my last video. So I'm not going to go into more detail. I'll also be doing... This deck is largely going to be the same. The only card that might be added is Encased in Carbonite. I'm going to be doing a deck tech for this going to set 2. I think it'll be a little weaker, but it'll still be... I think definitively for set 1 this was by far the strongest deck. And I'll go into why when I do the deck tech. And the deck tech will be focused on set 2, so it will include Encased in Carbonite and Subcapacity and talk about predictions for set 2 meta. The only difference between this list and the list from my last video from the Red Seal Gaming event is I dropped a Devotion for a Search Your Feelings to shore up the control matchup a little bit more. I also felt Devotion wasn't really needed for the aggro matchup. I think, in hindsight, it was wrong for 2 reasons. The cards in my sideboard for specifically Sabine, so not just any aggro, but for Sabine aggros, are Fet's Fire Spray to lower the curve from Avenger, and Devotion to essentially just put on the leader. It can go on other units, and I'll go into that when I did that in rounds, and I'll go into that. But it's mostly for the leader. I think it's 2 Fet's Fire Spray and 3 Devotion. If I were to run these events again, I would be making that swap. I also think Spark of the Rebellion I might be a little too hot on. I still stand by what I said in the last video about it having more applicable matchups than other anti-control cards, but then in the control mirror, it could just hit nothing. So I'm not really sure how needed the 3rd copy is. Restock, Search Your Feelings, Bounty Hunter Crew seem to be the, aside from obviously Vigilance, seem to be the key tech cards in hard control versus hard control. I don't think I said this. The Fet's Fire Spray, another reason why it should be 2 Fet's Fire Spray, 3 Devotion versus Sabine matchups is to increase Greedo odds. It gets up to about, not redoing the odds for like the turn that he is getting defeated and checking the top of your deck. It gets up to around 78% with after sideboard. Mining Guild Tie come out, Avenger come out, Fet's Fire Spray come in, and then dropping it. And honestly, I'm not even sure. Probably at least 1 Fet's Fire Spray, probably 2 for the bit of redundancy since you can resource in this game the extra or the early copies, and it probably needs another finisher. But I rarely actually finish with Fet's Fire Spray when I'm playing against Sabine. It's normally my leader or some combination of Bosk and Bounty Hunter Crew. Alright, so to cover the events, I'm going to talk about East Coast Gamers first. This is the one where I placed first. It was a 22-player event. It was 5 rounds, no top cut. It was a Friday night. They didn't want it to go all night. It lasted from about 7 to midnight. Standard best of 3 of 55 minutes. Great store, very well run, and very nice community. Saw a few familiar faces, and actually found out it's the local store of somebody that's been coming down to Red Seal a lot. So that was pretty cool. Um, Round one, I don't think there's much to say about it because I don't really think that that GI Blue, Grand Inquisitor Blue, is much of a deck currently. I think Grand Inquisitor is going to be much more viable, a much more viable leader in set two, probably with GI Yellow. It was still a decently good match. He was able to pressure me a bit with GI's ability to just play a unit and ready it up immediately. I think GI is just a very solid leader against control because of the ability to just always ready the unit that you play, as long as it's 3 or less power, but you design around that. I think GI is going to be a threat moving forward, especially obviously as more sets get added. It's going to probably be the control killer. It's going to struggle in some mid range and aggro matchups though. Maybe. Round two was against Yellow Boba. As you can see, oh, I switched Yellow Boba, yeah, whatever. Um, as you can see with the rest of this report, it's not. I'm highly favored in that matchup. I said this in the last video. I think the stuff like the Leia decks, the mid-rangey, aggro-y Leia decks, and the basically anything that's lower to the ground and not Sabine, this deck really shines against. And then with the way I have the deck set up, it is also very good against Sabine. So that matchup went pretty well. I think the only notes I took, let me bring up my notes on my phone. The only notes I took for the first couple rounds was I just curved out with removal, like have the power Darkside Waylay, I Am Your Father, like some type of, like one of the 3 cost removals into either another 3 cost removal or takedown. I'm using Mining Guild TIE Fighter in a lot of these matchups, or Greedo. Greedo is as another removal with the other 3 that I mentioned, and then Mining Guild TIE Fighter I'm just trying to resolve early and generate card advantage, and it works really well in everything but Sabine, because Sabine gives the eventual reach with the ping, but these other matchups don't have that, so I have more time to just draw cards, and then once I've drawn enough cards, the game's just pretty much locked. So this progresses for the rest of them. Iden Blue, there was a little more context. Game 1, he didn't have his deck set up for the control mirror, so game 1, pretty easy in my favor. This is, so the people that watched my last video know that there's an Iden Blue, or Krennic Blue, correction, it was a Krennic Blue mid-range deck that was going around. It's more creature-based. This is Iden Blue Control. I just had more cards for the control mirror. He doesn't have Bounty Hunter Cruise, he doesn't have Sparks in main deck. I think he had 3 searches, 3 restocks, and that was it. Or 3 searches and some amount of restocks in main. Went very easy. Game 2 lasted over 40 minutes, so we went to time. Game 1 went pretty quick. Maybe game 2 is closer to like 35 or 30, but I remember game 1 being like we got through pretty quick. Game 2, he actually had me. He did say that he didn't end up conceding. I won, but he had a play that would have let him win, and when he was asked after the game, he said, I just didn't feel like taking it because, you know, he won game 1, and he didn't feel like rolling off forward or anything like that, so he's just going to concede to me anyways, apparently. This is also part of the reason why I had teched more in, like, just made this small change with search, because the hard control mirrors are always just trying to one up each other, and it ends up in a bit of a weird spot. That's going to come into play in the top cut of Gilded Raven games, which I'll go into soon. Round 4 was Leia Red. This falls similar into to similar category as Boba Yellow. It's just very hard for them to push enough. Like, I'm just, as long as I'm curving out with removal, they have very little ability to actually push damage. And then eventually an Avenger comes down and locks the game. If I don't just clean it up with something like sticking a Bosk. Bosk is also really big in these matchups. If a Bosk stays on the field and it just keeps hitting for 2 on playing multiple spells a game, Mighty Guild TIE Fighter just drawing cards, it's very hard to get out of. And then Boba Yellow, same thing. He made some comments after the game how, like, even though he had made me discard 3 or 4 cards game 1 and 4 or 5 cards game 2, it got me down to no cards in hand game 1. Game 2 I had the Mining Guild set up, so even though he made me discard, I think it was 5 game 2, the Mining Guild just kept pumping out cards and eventually it just overcame him. Game 1 he got me down to no cards after making me discard 3 or 4, and he just felt like, my top decks were just always, which they are, because everything in the deck is essentially either a removal or a removal. So it becomes very hard for these decks to do anything unless they're able to go wide to the board, push damage early, and then have the reach to finish it out, which that's Fire Spray does give some reach. That's really it. Shoot first, not shoot first, the Surprise Strike requires a unit to be on the board, and it can't be action condensed. So, East Coast gamers, very smooth, didn't drop a game. Scariest matchup was the Control Mirror. Gonna be the same thing at Gilded Raven. Gilded Raven, East Coast was on Friday the 21st, something like that, June 21st. Gilded Raven Games was Saturday the 23rd. It was 24 players, 1K setup. It was a little under 1K because we only had 24. The 1K numbers were for 32. It was averaged out between 32 and 16 players, but it was essentially a 1K. Oh, small tangent. The reason there's asterisk there is because the first 1K, the top 2 split, was only a $15 buy-in, but it was structured like a 1K. So it wasn't like the payout of a full 1K, but it's essentially a mock 1K or the pseudo 1K. Anyways, back to this. 5 rounds into top 8 cut, standard best of 3, 55 minutes. I was also a judge, and I made a bad call. I called a sneak attack interaction with ambush wrong, and I feel bad about it, but apparently it didn't affect the game, which is good, and now I know how it works. I definitely need to study up more. The ruling was very obvious too. Be sneak attack as an event goes to the discard and fully resolves before ambush would trigger. I thought it would work like Fet's Fire Spray and Grill Attack Pod, where they can stack ambush and enter play ready. Doesn't work that way. Pretty humbling. I need to learn the rules a little better. Other than that, the event went smooth. I don't think there were any other issues with the judge calls. It was me and my friend Sean that were judging. We were only called a few times throughout the day, and everything else seemed to go smooth. That was the most complicated interaction we were called for. Round 1, I played against somebody I have seen traveling around the area quite a bit with Boba Green. It's a very hard matchup for him. It is winnable, but it swings in Control's favor. Similar to Boba Yellow, it's just and those other types of decks. This one's a little better, I think, because it has the ability to go a little wider with Vader later, getting 2 units on the board in one action, and one of them being like it's saving a card in a mana. Vader 5/7 for 7. It's like the value of like a 5 or 6 resource. Sorry, I'm trying to get the right terminology. Card, and then obviously up to 3 resources of value from the card that you get. But it's just very hard for them to be able to push enough damage and then have the tools to close it out. Boba Yellow talked about that. Very often goes 2-0 in my favor. Sabine Yellow. This is, I think, the hardest matchup for this deck. It's between Sabine Yellow. I Definitely Sabine Yellow, but it could be, there's an argument for some Han Green lists that are just very value driven, with tools like especially Sneak Attack to like get some immediate or single phase damage and push through a lot of it. So this is, I consider it one of my worst two matchups. I have talked about this line before with Greedo and how my deck's designed around making Greedo hit for 5 with 3 and then discard the top and it's a non-unit. As consistently as possible. I hit Greedo all 3 games. Game 1 seemed like it was locked in my favor. He had gone through a K2SO and a sneak attack a few turns earlier. I knew he had a K2SO in hand and one unknown card. He was at 28, I was at 27. I had the opportunity to just take initiative, assuming that he could just play K2SO and couldn't actually push through more damage. It happened to be that he had K2SO and sneak attack, so he was able to push the last 4 before, with initiative, I could finish him off at a Bosk and a Boba on the field leader. Um, Games 2 and 3, I hit the Greedo again. It was pretty much locked. Have the Greedo, remove their units. Let me see if I took any more specific notes. I think it was just about... Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it's... I'm curving out with Vigilance into... Or no, that's the wrong one. Wrong. I'm curving out with removal, Greedo, and then game 2 I had the Devotion set up, so I ended up with getting my leader out with Devotion on him, and unless they have the Confiscate, or in this case it would be Fang Fighter. Unless they have that to immediately take it off, it kind of just runs away with the game. Or a way to now just start attacking the leader to try to get the leader kill. It's not a good situation. And then shortly after that, I had a second devotion on a Bosk, and then the Bosk is just there pinging. He scooped shortly after that. Game 3, no devotions, but again, Bosk setup, curving out with removal, have the Greedo, get a Bosk stuck on the board, and the Bosk is just... That's the whole point of the deck is Bosk and Greedo with events, and Bosk is just pinging everything and repairs, healing for 3, and dealing 2 damage with Bosk. It's very hard to get out of once I have the lock set up. So, yeah, Sabine Yellow 2-1, Leia Blue, very cool deck. My friend's homebrew. I think it has a lot of potential against other mid-range and aggro decks, having the blue splashed in for removal, then with the green Rebel package into U-Wing and Home 1. It's pretty cool. I think there's a lot of tech options that could be used with it, like playing maybe an out-of-aspect sneak attack with Home 1 to get a burst 9 damage, because he did push my life total a lot, and you know, if he had some access to like some immediate damage, that could have closed games. As well as Regional Governor to hit off of U-Wing to name Super Laser Blast, which is the best way to clean up a U-Wing, although in many situations with U-Wing, including in these games against him, I'm set up with Bosk on the board, and as I've been saying a lot, Bosk just, you know, with enough resources and enough events in hand, which, you know, Mining Guild TIE Fighter drawing cards again, it's so hard to deal with. He just ends up cleaning boards by himself. Round 5, another friend of mine that I have played against a few times now in this matchup, and there came Greedo again. Both my hands were Greedo, Power of the Dark Side, and other cards. Game 2 was Greedo, Greedo, Power, Vigilance, Bosk, Bosk, and then I resourced a Bosk and a Greedo. Neither of the games were all too close. The curve out with Greedo and Power of the Dark Side or Waylay, Sometimes I Am Your Father, is just too hard for these, like, too much for these decks to deal with. Sabine Yellow having more ability to get immediate damage from hand to, like, push for finishing than Sabine Green, but I've felt pretty good playing against Sabines with this deck. Top 8 cut, played against the Leia Blue again. He's not really tech to deal with the control matchup, and there's not too much he can do to tech for it, but there are some things he can do. It's just, it's not favored. He pushed, I think he pushed me like over 20 at least one of the games again, got very close to closing, but just didn't have the tools to close out the game. And then I played against first mirror ever, like true mirror, Boba Blue mirror. This guy actually, I played against him at RSG, and he went and looked at my list and basically copied my list and changed, I think, around 10 cards from my list. And silver lining, I guess, is, I inspired someone, and they took that deck to eventual second place finish. Although I think it would have been first place. He ended up playing a Boba yellow in the finals, and I'll talk about that after I talk about my match. I think it would have been first place if it wasn't for what he changed. So what he changed was he added 3 Galactic Ambition and 3 Relentless and cut down on Waylay and Make an Opening to make room for them. He also cut down on, although the list I've posted from RSG didn't use a search, he cut a Spark of Rebellion, which I did mention at the start of this video. I'm not really sure how necessary the third one is. It is always, at the first is very important, and probably the second in case the first you don't have access to, just for the end game sequence in hard control mirrors. I'll go into that somewhere else. I don't want to fluff out this video too much. But the third one, he cut that in addition to Make an Opening, Waylay, cut Devotions from sideboard. I think those are the main difference than some like different cards in main deck and sideboard, like where if they're in main or side, but other than that, very similar. 60 cards. Game 1, he had 2 Vigilance in the starting hand. I didn't have any. I had a first hand that had, I think it was just a Spark, and I shipped it and like mulliganed and got even worse second hand, like no of the control versus control cards. And he has Vigilance, Vigilance. He plays Vigilance on 6 resources. Turn 5, he hits Bounty Hunter Crew, restock. So now I'm stuck with only 1 Bounty Hunter Crew in my deck, and then my game's over. In my main deck, I only have 3 Bounty Hunter Crews and 1 restock to play the end game. You need to have the restock to put restock plus 1 card back in. It's also why Spark is so important, because you need to be able to strip that before milling them. Or like strip, because it's normally like restock Bounty Hunter Crew and you strip one of them, let them use the other, and then mill it once they put it back in. But yeah, he hit Bounty Hunter restock. Turn 6, 7 resources. First action, he plays Vigilance again, and Bounty Hunter Crew. So I tried from there to turn on the beat stick. I'm not pushing damage in this matchup. This matchup is never really about damage. It's about who navigates the control versus control minigame better. And this really is a good testament to why I hate mirrors so much, because it's just who gets luckier. He just happened to hit the 4 cards he needed to hit to win the mill matchup, and that was a wrap for game 1. Game 2, I came to find out he sided in 3 Galactic Ambition, 3 Relentless. It's not open deck list, so I don't know that those exist. He ends up pushing some damage in the early game. I actually have the better hand this time in terms of playing the control game. He doesn't end up sticking an early Relentless, but he has I think it's like Mining Guilds with Avenger to stick an Avenger for an extra turn where I can't deal with it. Hits for 8 there, gets some chip damage with I think it was Greedo, 1 attack from a Greedo and 1 attack from Boba Leader. So that's 7. and then hits me with an Avenger one time, that's 8, and then game's going. Hits me again with a he gets a Relentless down on 11 resources. I am able to answer it, but he gets one attack off with it. That's pushed me up to like, I think it was like 16. I forget what the exact math was for the early game, but I'm at 16 at that point, and then I think it was like 17, and then he got more chip damage, and he got me to 24, and we're at the end game sequence. I pretty much have him dead to rights. The issue is I don't know what. So the situation is he has 2 searches in his graveyard. He has 2 sparks in his I don't know what it's called in this game, so apologies. Discard pile. So it's 2 sparks, 2 searches, all 3 of his Avengers, 2 of his Vigilance, 1 Relentless, 1 Galactic Ambition. Point being, he has. I'm like, how many slots can you have dedicated? Like, you're at top 4 table. You've gone through multiple Sabines to get here. How many spots can you have dedicated to anti-control cards beyond what I already see? And on the bottom of his deck, I know it's restock, Relentless, and I want to say the 3rd Vigilance. I know the exact 4 cards on the bottom of his deck. I know it's in his graveyard. I know that there's 2 Bounty Hunter crews in his discard as well, and in his hand, I know what there's I think 2 cards I don't know. It's only been 1 draw that I didn't know because I sparked the turn before just to check to make sure that it was safe. Going into the final turn to play my second spark, mill his final 6 cards, including the 4 that I know are there, and lock out the game. I know he has Bounty Hunter crew in those 2 cards. He has a Greedo on the board. I'm at like, I think I'm at 27 at this point, or 24. I'm at 24 at this point. And I'm stuck in just this really awkward position where I know I can have the lock on the game if I take initiative, but if he happens to have a 3rd Relentless and I take initiative, then I lose because my life total's too high. I have the tools to actually deal with the Relentless. If I'm not within lethal range of the Relentless, there's no way for him to get out of this. I have Power of the Dark Side, Spark of Rebellion, Vigilance, Restock, Bounty Hunter crew in my hand, and I have 14 resources, so I can restock, Spark of Rebellion for 5, pull his Bounty Hunter crew that he's going to draw on the next 2 if he doesn't already have it in his hand. He only has the 2 restocks in the bottom 4, so restock to blank the Relentless. Bounty Hunter, Spark of Rebellion to pull the Bounty Hunter crew, Vigilance to mill his last few cards. We're at 11, and then Power of the Dark Side to kill his unit, his Relentless. Untap 1. Vigilance could have also killed the Greedo if I needed to kill Greedo and mill. Untap 1 and then get the second restock down. So if I wasn't at such a high life total, it would have been locked. I also think that's why this package isn't that good. It really requires pushing damage, and this deck isn't running a lot of units, so doesn't push damage easily. Yeah, so he happened to have the Relentless and ends up closing the game because I took initiative. The line that I realized after the fact was I heal for 5. I play the Vigilance, heal for 5, and mill him out. And then I heal for 5, so I go down to 19, blank my first event, and then kill the Relentless. But again, I don't know that he's running the 3rd Relentless. I already have accounted for 2, and I'm thinking he can't have devoted so many cards to the control versus control. I talked to him after the game. He's like, yeah, he's like 3 Relentless, 3 Galactic Ambition. I'm like, what are you cutting for this? And he's cutting, anti-Sabine cards for it. He's cutting anti Boba cards for because the Waylay and Make an Opening are needed for Boba Yellow. I 0-2. It really felt bad. It's not how I wanted to go, like, end my set 1 season. I think there is insight here into the whole, and this is also how RSG went, where it was a deck that shouldn't have been able to get past Sabine's, and he happened to just get the nuts first 2 Sabines with what he was running, which let him get into top 8 at Red Seal Gaming. I'm talking about last week. And then he just has a deck that's tech to beat me in the finals, to beat the hard control mirror. He one ups it essentially, and it's similar here. He just has way more cards dedicated to the hard control mirror. I guess it's a way of checks and balances, and then he makes himself more vulnerable to aggro, and if he happens to get lucky and get past the aggro, then punishes the player that's more dedicated to beating aggro, which I think this is definitively the best deck aside from that caveat that, like, if the control decks decide to cannibalize themselves by always trying to one-up, then it's just going to weaken the other matchups so much that other decks will be able to beat them more consistently, which happens in the final. He loses the final because, in part, he has a Fet's Fire Spray on a turn that he needs to be able to play Make an Opening or Waylay. Either would have bought him another turn. I don't know what the next cards were, so I don't know if it was a guaranteed win. I'm also not sure how long the Fet's Fire Spray was in his hand because I was watching from the Boba Yellow perspective. But it would have bought him at least one more turn, potentially more, depending on if he... I don't know if he resourced the search, but that should have been a Waylay. Which would have... Oh, he did actually mention he would have had a Waylay as well. He did have the search. He could have bounced the unit that was buffed with Cunning, which is why Waylay is so important in that matchup. Something gets buffed with Cunning, and you just send it back to their hands. The Cunning buff is now... it's gone. So yeah, he got 2-0'd in the finals, and game 1 he drew so many extra cards too. Not so many. It was at least 4, if not 5. Game 2 he also had, I think he had a Mining Guild TIE Fighter going, and drew a few extra cards from that. But it goes to show how much changing just a few cards matter, because I've 2-0'd every Boba Yellow, and then he has a few cards different, and those few cards different he has in his hands, and it ends up hurting that matchup. So yeah, that's it. It's the end of set 1. Pretty good run, I guess. Set 2 coming up. I think I'm going to be testing, so I already started testing a bunch of decks. I'm going to do a deck tech for this deck for set 2. I guess to close out, just here you can see the Gildan Raven top 8. That was Boba Blue me by... This is by seed going out of round, so Boba Blue, me, then Sabine Green, Boba Yellow, Sabine Yellow, Boba Blue, Boba Green, Vader Green, Leia Blue. Decent spread of decks, Boba and Sabine being 2 of the most represented is no surprise to me. I think we're going to continue to see this into set 2. But yeah, I'm half asleep. Hopefully this stayed on topic enough. Like, comment, subscribe if you like this. I will likely be coming out in the near future with a how to get started video for new players and a set 2 predictions or review or something of that nature broken down, just reviewing all the cards by color. Yep. Well, yeah, that's all. Good night, good morning, whatever it is for you. Peace.